Hi Year 11. We're going to have a look today at a paper 2. So if you just have a look at the screen, I just want to remind you quickly what that paper 2 looks like. So you've got paper 1 across the top and paper 2 across the bottom. Paper 2, if you remember, is all about the writer's viewpoints and perspectives, so what people think. And if you look first of all at question 5, because we always get you to do the writing first, the writing task here will be something that gets you to write about your own views, maybe something persuasive or something argumentative where you get to express a viewpoint. That writing task is worth 40 marks, so it's worth half of the marks available on this paper. So we would advise you to do that first. Questions 1 to 4 are your reading questions, and they will be based on 2 non-fiction texts. So whereas paper 1 is fiction, paper 2 is where your non-fiction comes in. And if it helps you to remember it, paper 1 has 1 text, paper 2 has 2 texts. So question 1 is where they give you 8 statements and you have to identify the 4 of them that are true. And that's worth 4 marks. That's a nice way to start this paper. We then advise you to move to question 2, which is where you are asked to write a summary of either similarities or differences. You're not being asked to dig into language there. You are just being asked to say what those similarities and differences are and what's suggested. We then would suggest that you move to question 4. And the reason we get you to do question 2 and 4 next to each other is because they both involve 2 texts. So you can probably recycle some of your ideas from question 2 and question 4. Question 4 is worth 16 marks and is going to ask you to compare the writer's methods in terms of how they've created viewpoints and perspectives. So what's the writer thinking and how are they expressing that, and you're comparing that in the 2 different texts. And then to finish the whole thing off, you will have a go at question 3, which is where you're analysing the writer's use of language. It's worth 12 marks here, but it is the same skill that you're used to from paper 1. So you can see on this little map from AQA, they've drawn that orange box around it to show that that skill is the same on both of those papers. So the skills and the strategies that you use on paper 1, you'll use on paper 2 as well. So we're going to have a look at the reading section of this paper and just work through questions 1 to 4. The reading element of this is obviously really important. You've got 2 texts there, and if we have a little look at the insert, it tells you a little bit about these 2 texts. There's a little blurb. This is an AQA paper, one of their sample papers that they put together. And the 2 texts that they've chosen, source A, you've got 20th century non-fiction, a piece called The Death Zone by Matt Dickinson, and that's an extract from a book that was printed in 1997. As soon as you read these little blurbs, Year 11, you need to be thinking about what does that suggest? What atmosphere does this create? What are my expectations? And just give yourself a few hints as to what that might be about. So the death zone obviously sounds dangerous, sounds perilous, sounds as if there's some sort of threat. From what we don't know yet, we'll have to read the text, but we can tell there's something that puts Matt Dickinson perhaps in danger. Source B is a 19th century literary non-fiction text. It's a little bit older. And you can see it's called London Snow. Again, what are your expectations? So we've obviously got a location of London, which straight away we will have ideas about, and also the fact that it's snow. So we're dealing with something to do with the weather here, and that could be the common theme across both of these texts. With source B, it's an extract from a diary written by Arthur Munby, published in 1867. Because it's a diary, again, you've got expectations based on that genre. So you know it's going to be a first person piece, you know it's going to be expressing an experience from that first person point of view, so it's likely to have thoughts, experiences, feelings, emotional reactions to what's happening there as well. Okay, first thing you're going to do, Year 11, is you're going to read source A, and when you read source A, you're going to do these 3 things. You're going to look for the answers to question 1, which I'm going to tell you more about in a second. You're going to look for evidence for question 2, and if you look in your pack, you can see that question 2 is asking you about how the weather, so there's your common theme between the 2 texts, how the weather affects people differently in those 2 texts. And then you're also going to look for any viewpoints or perspectives that are being expressed, and thinking about the language that is being used to present them. Okay. If we have a little look then at question 1, and what that looks like, you can see that it directs you really specifically to source A. so make sure you always go to the right text. And here it's lines 1 to 12. You've been asked to find 4 statements, and it will always be 4 that are true. You've got 8 there to choose from, and it tells you at the top there how you fill in those little blobs on that mark, on that exam paper, by shading in the little circles. There's a little tip in the bottom right hand corner there that says you will need to read the text carefully to discover which statements are true and which ones are false. It might not always be explicitly obvious, you might have to dig a little bit. There might also be a one that seems true, but there's a subtle difference, a subtle thing that just makes it false. So just check that carefully in case there's one in there to just catch you. What I'm going to ask you to do is to have a go at answering question 1. And you can see the little post-it note that's on the screen there to remind you of the evidence you're going to look for question 2. So how does the weather affect people? And then any viewpoints and perspectives. So have a read through the whole text, answer that, see what evidence you can find, pause the video now, no peeking at the answers for question 1, and then restart it when you're ready to have a look at those. There you go, you can check your answers so that you can see that B, C, G and H were the correct answers there. Now that you've done question 1, we're going to have a look at question 2. Now this question asks you to write a summary of the differences between sources A and B. This question happens to ask you about difference, but some of them do ask you about similarity as well, so always check that wording really carefully. You can see that the difference you're looking for here is about how the weather affects people differently. So you need to refer to source A and source B for this question. The effects of the weather on people in both sources are very different. Use details, so you're going to need quotations here, from both sources to write a summary of the different ways people are affected by the weather. So you've read source A, you've read about how they were affected by that storm that hit the mountain, and one of the ways they were affected was being stunned by the sight of it. They were mesmerised by it. You could talk about how they were afraid of it. You could talk about how it destroyed the camp, how they described how the wind ripped through their tents and belongings. So you've got lots of different examples there of how the weather has affected people. You're going to read source B and you'll find different examples, but you might find that whereas source A was destructive, source B, that weather's just inconvenient. It just, it makes it very difficult for people to go about their business. And that whilst in source A, the weather was really violent and made people afraid, in source B, it just smothered everything and was beautiful. So you can look at those differences. So what I'd like you to do is to pause the video and read through source B, and this time you're looking for the evidence of how the weather affects people and also any viewpoints that they express about that and the language that's used for them. So pause and then have a go at finding those quotations. Now that you've got those quotations, we need to look at how you would actually go about writing these as an answer. This question's worth 8 marks and you'd be looking to spend only about 10 minutes on this question. What I've got here that I think is really useful is some example answers, and these are printed in your booklet. So you've got these and you can look at them and annotate them to see which mark you think they would get. And when the examiners mark your paper, they see a screen like this. So down the left hand side is the mark scheme for the question. So you can see that that's the question 2 mark scheme. There are 8 marks available. So you would get 1 to 2 marks if your work was in this band here, simple and limited, where you demonstrate those different skills there. And we'll talk about those in more detail in a second. You would get 3 to 4 marks if you show some attempt at summarising. You would get 5 to 6 marks if you have a clear and relevant summary, and then if your summary is perceptive, you could be looking at 7 to 8 marks. So the examiner has those statements down the left hand side. Your work then magically appears at the right hand side, your answer would show there. And the examiner who is marking your paper, what they have to do is they would read it and they would evaluate it against that criteria, and they would click and drag the relevant statement from the left hand side onto your answer to show that you were demonstrating that skill there. And when we see marked papers from the exam board, it's got little lines from the mark scheme all over it, so those examiners are looking for how they can give you that credit. So I want to show you some example answers. They're of different qualities and they will show you how you get those higher marks. Let's start with this one here. So in this answer, somebody said in source A, 8 climbers are killed in the storm, but in source B, no one is killed. So the effects of the weather are different. Someone gets a frozen beard in source B. They always write about the frozen beard. That's an absolutely valid point, okay, in terms of how the weather affects people differently. Yep, in source A people are killed, in source B no one is killed. That's a completely valid comparison to have made. In terms of the skills that it demonstrates, that piece of work would get band 1. The reason it gets band 1 is it offers paraphrase rather than inference. It's just putting the text into its own words. They're not digging into it and exploring what's suggested there. They're just saying literally, well, nobody was killed and somebody was killed. There is reference to the text, but there are no quotations. You can see that second bullet point there. They have made reference to both texts here. So that they've got credit there, and the statement does show simple differences between the texts. So it's a straightforward difference that this person has spotted. So that's why that would get band 1. It would get 1 or 2 marks. This answer here, obviously it's more detailed. There's more there, but let's see what it would get. So in source A, when the storm arrives, it traps 30 climbers in the death zone, and after a night from hell, 8 of them die. Now that point is exactly the same as the first one. It's saying that people died in this text, in this situation. But look at how they've expressed it better. They've used quotations. So because they're using those quotations, that gets it into a higher band. They've made reference to the difference. So this is different to source B because no one is killed because of the weather. The snow makes the writer's beard freeze, again, and everyone has to put warm clothes on, but that's it. In source A, the weather has a dangerous effect on people, but in source B, it's not really a problem. So this candidate's understood the differences between the effects on people. What they've done here with source A is the best bit of this answer, because they've quoted it clearly, and they've also explained how that effect is different. So there's a little bit of inference here about it being dangerous and how it's affected people. And that would get band 2. So those skills that I've talked about are those band 2 skills. A little bit more here. So let's look at this answer. Source A shows the effect that a sudden storm can have on people on Mount Everest. For example, 30 climbers become trapped in the death zone fighting for their lives. The Indian climbers are stranded, exhausted, and with their oxygen supplies running out. See how they've dropped those quotations, they've embedded those quotations in their answers. That's a really good skill, which suggests that the weather has taken them by surprise, because they're obviously not prepared for the storm. Right, that bit there is a clear inference, and that's why this one's going to get a band 3. Okay, so making clear inference. It's not obvious. This candidate has interpreted the text. They've done some reading between the lines, and they've said that, right, well, they obviously weren't prepared. They've been taken by surprise. That's how they've been affected. By the end of the following day, 8 people have been killed, and from this we can infer, so again they're digging, that the weather can be fatal. If people don't have shelter, they will die. However, in source B, the weather is not dangerous. It does result in some people wearing extra layers of clothing and some even stay indoors, but those who do go out only have to blow on their fingers and stamp their feet to keep the cold out. The main difference between the effects in source A and those in source B is that the storm on Everest can kill people, but in London the snow is just more likely to freeze your beard, again, or turn your hair white. So you can see that inference is there, and that's why this candidate gets into band 3. Okay, so you can see the idea is the same as that band 1 answer, but you can see how much more detail's been used. The quotations have been put in there, and there is some inference. Okay, so you've seen answers at the quality of band 1, band 2, band 3. So you'll obviously see that band 4 is on its way. These videos have got a 15-minute time limit, so we're up on this one. So if you want to see the band 4 one, you need to click on the next link so that you can listen to the second part.